Hello, fellow rewildologists. Welcome back to Rewildology, where we explore conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and world traveler. Recently, I asked all of you on Instagram if you preferred one long episode or two shorter episodes of the same interview split in half. About 2/3 of you voted for 2 episodes released in the same week, and I am happy to deliver. Today is part 1 of a 2-part series with Jon Rossi of the Rossifari Podcast. If COVID turned your life upside down like I know it has so many of us, then you'll definitely relate to Jon's story. Jon is a professional drummer with a very successful career touring across the U.S. sharing his talents. But when COVID hit, all of his work and his strongest passion were ripped away from him. While on the road, Jon found joy visiting zoos and aquariums to escape from negative influences that were all around him. In doing so, he met lots of amazing animals and zookeepers, which became a podcast idea shortly after he was locked down at home. He found a new passion and a new title, Conservation Educator. If you've ever thought about doing something that was maybe in a different field or outside of your expertise, or you need some encouragement to finally tackle that one idea you've had for years, then you must listen to this show. If you would like me to keep this 2-part episode format, please let me know by sending me a DM on Instagram at Rewildology or emailing me at hello@rewildology.com. I'd love to hear from you and if you're digging the new style. Also, please like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening so that others can discover how we can rewild the planet together. If you're an iTunes listener, please rate and review the show and let me know what you think of the podcast so far. And now, on to part 1 with Jon. Awesome. Well, if you got your water and your snake is all contained, we'll go ahead
I hope so.
get started. I hope so too. Oh,
That was so scary.
thing.
Like I
Yeah.
walked in and I looked up, and sometimes when our snake sheds, Zoe, she likes to keep the skin and she'll leave it like on top of the enclosure or whatever. And I was like, oh, did AJ shed? AJ's shed is moving. Oh shit. Luckily, I'm very used to I handle emergency situations pretty well. So I just very calmly walked over, grabbed him, picked him up, put him back in his place, and threw some heavy stuff on top of the lid and checked the corners. So I think we're okay, but who knows?
Talk about a wild way to start a podcast. We're like, well, okay. Thank God I needed a drink of water because my snake might be under a couch by this point. And
Yeah. See that, kids? Hydration really is important.
yeah. If you're ever going to sit down and do an interview, make sure you have water and go up and get it because you never know what you might find.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jon, for coming on. I'm so stoked that you're with me because your story is very unique. And with that, I think a lot of people are going to connect with you. So I am so stoked. So before we get into all of that, let's paint a picture of who you are. So take me back in time. Where are you from? What was your childhood like? Where did you grow up?
Cool. So, my name is Jon Rossi, Jonathan Rossi, since we're going back in time, even though I go by Jon. And Jonathan was born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It's kind of northeastern Pennsylvania. The Office is very popular, and it's from Scranton. And Scranton and Wilkes-Barre are kind of like twin cities. They're, 20, 30 miles apart from each other. And so I was born up there, and my grandfather still lives up there, so I still do go visit him. And that reminds me, I should call him. But anyway,
Yeah, please do that.
Whoops. And then my family moved out of there pretty early on. They moved around a lot when I was like the first couple years of life, but then they settled in central Pennsylvania in a town called Mechanicsburg, and I grew up there, and I lived there my whole life until maybe 6 years ago when I moved to Philadelphia. And yeah, childhood was cool. I pretty early on, my dad had told me about being a drummer. He was not a professional, but he was an amateur, but a very good drummer, and really intrigued me. And so I always thought that I should learn some drums. And so I started taking lessons and got his kit and some sticks and stuff pretty early on. And There was a time that a choir instructor showed us the Beatles on Sullivan. And despite the fact that I was very much not alive back when that happened in 1964, it was as though it was happening live to me. And I watched Ringo banging away on the kit, and I knew that was my destiny. I knew I was going to be a touring musician. I knew drums were my thing. And over the years, I've learned a lot about a lot of other instruments, and I can goof around on some of them. But drumming was always my passion with like a laser focus. And my goal was to become a touring drummer. And I would happily walk away from good jobs or screw up at school or whatever it took if it meant that I was going to be building my drumming even just a little bit more. And over that time, for people who are wondering what that has to do with animals, it doesn't. But over that time, one of my main passions was going to the Maryland Zoo and the National Aquarium, which were pretty close to me. That was always a fun date for me, was to take a girl down there. I feel like you get to see your true self and their true self when you're around animals. Guards are let
That's a
down
good
pretty
date.
easily. Yeah, right. Yeah. And like also it's just I think it's so much harder to not be real when you're being inspired and all of that. Or if you're not, then get out, because we're clearly not a match.
It's a
So either
zoo.
way, yeah. So that was, but because I was always focused on the drum stuff, I never even really thought that I might have another passion or another thing that like could be a goal for me as well. But then once I started touring and started, I had achieved that goal. Then I started to look at what else was out there, and the animal stuff was really important to me, and it kept becoming more important to me, and led to me starting Rossifari.
Awesome. So let's get the timeline ironed out as well. So when was it that you really discovered that like drumming was your calling? Around what age were you at that time?
It was in middle school, like sixth grade, let's say, is when
Mm.
I saw that video of Ringo, and everything shifted. Up until that point, I was going to be a lawyer or a politician, or apparently at one point a farmer, my mother tells me, which does not really fit me at all, but hey, whatever. I was young. Um, and then when that happened in sixth grade, it also coincided with me kind of finding out that I was like the top drummer at our school. Like as we got assigned different parts and stuff, things were happening, and there
Just
was a
solidified in you.
yeah, and I was like, "Oh wait, I love this and I'm good at it. Okay, cool." And back then, being the top drummer at Mechanicsburg Middle School to me meant like I was guaranteed a ticket to touring and stuff. And I did not realize how not true that is until much later. But it helped because I just stayed motivated and just was like, "Oh yeah, this is what I do. I'm a drummer." I'm like, "Yeah."
That's awesome. I mean, and good for you, to not let like the realization of like reality, especially I'm sure as you got older, to realize how hard it is going to be to pursue that very particular path down. So take me to after high school. Did you end up going to like a musician school, or did you immediately try to get into the industry? And like, so what is the path that took you to becoming a touring drummer? Like that's a massive accomplishment.
Sure. So basically it was you know, people in my life were not super excited about the idea. And so I got accepted to Berkeley, which is one of the, if not the top colleges for music. It's up in Boston. It is amazing. And especially for like modern music, jazz and rock and stuff, it's the school. And I got accepted and I was super excited, but no one was willing to pay for it. And I thought going into debt for that was probably a bad idea. And so I tried to balance it and go off to some colleges. I tried a couple different times, a history major, a business major. But what I would do is I would go and I would take some classes and I would be doing well. And then I would get the chance to play at a couple of bars at 2 or 3 until 3 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't be in my classes anymore. And it turns out if you don't go to your classes, you don't do real well. So I ended up going back and finally getting a degree actually in kind of in a human resource area, but that was after I was a successful enough drummer to be able to start to like focus my attention on other things. But yeah, I had horse blinders on, and I always love to tell the story that even like back in high school, like my high school sweetheart would come over and sit downstairs doing her homework while I practiced.
That's
And like
awesome.
we would hang out sometimes, but like also not. And she got to be really good friends with my parents because, they'd be prepping dinner and she'd be doing homework and talking to them, and I'd be banging away on the kit upstairs. And there were times when I was single that like girls would literally be like, "Yo, take me to a movie," and I'd be like, "I've got to practice." And for a high school boy, that's insane.
Yes.
That's really crazy. So yeah, I was always pretty driven towards that goal.
So that's awesome, especially to hear that you took an unconventional path, meaning like you didn't follow the status quo. Like you went directly into the real stuff, essentially. And it wasn't theory at that point. You're like, I'm going to be a touring musician. And so you made that happen. So what happened after high school? So you didn't go to Berkeley, but you are, I mean, right now COVID, but we'll get into that, a successful touring musician. So how'd you get in? That is a hard field to get into.
It's kind of funny. I took every gig that I could. I took every opportunity that was available to me. I wow, some of the stuff that I did, I look back on and I can't even believe it. There was a period of time that I would be playing for a theater and then walking out as soon as the music ended, running to my car and running to a bar to play another 4-hour bar gig, right after. There was one night or one couple of weeks when I was playing Les Miserables at a theater and then going and playing as a rock drummer until, 2 a.m. And that's just really confusing if you know those styles of music. I'm sitting in an orchestra 1 minute and pounding the snot out of my drums the next. And yeah, I just, every gig that I could take. The funny thing about it though is that you could really track my entire career to touring through like 3 or 4 of those gigs out of the literally thousands and thousands that I did, and hundreds of people that I met and begged, and auditions that I sent that were never even looked at, and all this stuff. Um, there was a time that I was in a band, and the guitarist quit, and I took a volunteer gig playing the musical ragtime just because I needed a gig all of a sudden, and I like the music. And the guitarist there really liked me and took me to my first paid theater gigs with him. And then he got hired at a theater that then was a professional theater called Allenbury, and he brought me along with him there when they needed a drummer. And the first music director I worked for there really liked me, and 3 years later, booked a national tour and was like, "Hey, I've got a drummer." So it's hilarious because I could tell you thousands of stories and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of hours and blood, sweat, tears, eviction notices, eating at McDonald's because it was all I could afford, all the things. But those 4 steps went from amateur drummer to touring drummer like that quickly. But it took years, and you never know what's going to be the thing. So you have to, it's you throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Wow. I mean, that alone, I think should, I hope anybody listening really internalizes that. It's like, if you have a path, it's going to be hard, but that's okay. Just keep going and persevere, because you don't know what that corner is going to be.
And
That's
I had no
that's
clue when I got into the conservation and zookeeping side that it's the same way. It's
yes.
I always say it's amazing to me that most people, even when you go and see a tour, if you see a theater tour, or even if you go out and see like a famous artist who has a backing band that, you're not going and seeing Aerosmith, you're going and seeing Johnny Lang, and then he's got a backing band. A lot of those people are not making a lot of money, not what you're expecting for a touring musician. I do very well for myself. I've found some good niches to be in, but there are people that you will see on a tour that you think, wow, they are living the life, that are making $400 a week. And the same is true
Wow.
in the zoo and conservation fields. You see, zookeepers that have been at zoos for 10 years and they're making $15 an hour, and you're like, excuse me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what? Like, but you do it because you love it and because you can't think of anything else that you want to do so badly. And, all of the travel and all of the getting to do what you love and setting your own hours and being your own boss to a point and all of that, make it worthwhile.
Yeah, so was it when you landed this theater job? So it sounds like that just happened organically, like being a drummer in a theatrical setting. Um, is that when you started to tour, or were you already touring? So like let's get to into the path that started to take you around the US where you started to really explore stuff. So what was it like? Was that really when you started to see, well, even the world, because you've been international? Was it that?
So I had a couple of cool opportunities. I feel like almost everyone who does this has these random moments of glory, even if you end up not having a successful career. And so, like, yeah, when I was 18, I got to go tour with this like band that went through Europe, and I did a bunch of European touring. But it wasn't anything other than a really cool experience. Like I love it and I'm grateful for it and I remember it. But yeah, it was meant nothing. And almost everyone that was there is not in the industry at all anymore. So like that was a cool fluke thing that happened. But yeah, no, most of it was just, I would try to do little tours with the bands I was in or whatever. But it wasn't until I hit professional theatrical playing and then started to build my resume, and then I booked my first national tour. And once that happened, it blew up. And I've been on the road, again, not counting COVID, for 7 years, more on it than off it. So
That's awesome. That's a good way to see the US on someone else's dime, that's for
oh
sure.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So, from what I remember in our call, this is when you really started to see a lot of zoos and aquariums and other sanctuaries around. So, tell me about that experience and why you decided or why you felt compelled when you were in these areas to go visit those specific type of institutions, because you could go to like art museums or different type of things, but it was something particular about zoos. So what was that?
I have always found that I have a special connection to animals, whether they know it or not. um, and to me, it started off with turtles, and especially sea turtles. They can bring me a peace and calm that nothing else to this day can. There is no better feeling in the world for me when I am stressed than standing in front of the Ocean Voyager tank at Adventure Aquarium and saying hi to the four turtles there and just kind of hanging out. And it has a really cool effect on my brain. It's very calming. And all animals have different effects, but they're all positive. I love all animals. And when I started touring, um, I definitely liked zoos and they were on the list. And as the schedule allowed, I went to a few. But my second national tour was 11 months long. And that is a hellaciously long time to be
That's
on the road.
crazy.
And it was 11 months of one-nighters for the most part. A lot of places, when you do bigger tours, if you're in Hamilton or Wicked or something where you're going to be out, you're going to do 2 weeks a month in a city. So you get a house. I was on the bus every day.
Wow.
And I loved it. I love touring. But one of the main things you learn when you're touring is that there are people who aren't built for the road, and they booked the tour anyway, and they're finding out that they're not built for the road. And so there was a lot of stuff that people were doing that I just didn't appreciate. There's also, I am not a heavy drinker at all, and there's a lot of real heavy, every night after the show, let's go get smashed. Again,
Maybe
not.
even with other things too, extracurriculars
Oh
on
yeah,
top of that.
definitely. And hey, no judgment. And there are times that I will have some fun, but that's just not who I've ever been really. And so I didn't want to spend my money doing that and my time doing that, and I wanted to have the calm and the peace that I was, because I was loving tour. And we'd have these conversations on the bus, and people would be like, "Oh, this sucks and that sucks, and oh, I'm so mad about this," and I'm like, guys, we were just in this place and we saw these things, and then 2,000 people saw us do our show, and like, I'm so happy. And yeah, we know, John, we know you like touring. We get it. And so I was just looking for something to keep me happy and positive, and not let myself fall into that thing I saw other people doing. And as I thought about myself and things that made me happy, I was like, well, I like zoos, and it turns out that most cities that you play will have some form of animal thing. And so, it started off wanting to go to a zoo or an aquarium every time I got to a town. And then literally like the first time I did that, I was just like, oh, this is good. Oh yeah, no, I need to be here right now. And once that had happened once, I was like, well, got to keep that going. And so every opportunity I got, as soon as our bus pulled into town, I already knew how to get to the zoo and where it was and what the hours were and when sound check was, and I made it my priority.
Did you tell me about that one story where like you had already had like an Uber waiting and to pick you up
Oh
and
yeah.
you ran? What zoo
So
was that?
we get to Toledo, Ohio, and I had heard that the Toledo Zoo was incredible, and I wanted to go. And we got to town late. And so what I did was I actually called the Uber a little early. I was using maps on my phone to just track where our bus was. And the Uber was waiting for me, charging that extra dollar or whatever it is a minute. Um, and I was the first one off the bus. And I grabbed my stuff and I grabbed my key and I threw my stuff into the room and literally like just on the floor, didn't even go in. Had to pee so bad, figured I would do that at the zoo, whatever. Ran back downstairs. People were still getting off the bus, and I hopped in that Uber and I took off. And since we were late and it was a bit of a haul to the zoo, um, I didn't have a ton of time, and it's a decent sized zoo, so I jogged the zoo. And I stopped at enclosures, and I made sure to give more time to the animals that I wanted to see, and less time to the ones that I cared about less. But I ran through that zoo, and I left that zoo a sweaty mess, and hopped into the Uber that I had again waiting for me and went right to sound check. And I walked into sound check and I was like, hey guys, I'm here. I'm blue suede. Okay, cool. All right. Let's go. I didn't even run into my dressing room to put my stuff down. I ran on stage with my backpack and my sweating and the Toledo Zoo sweatshirt and stuffed sloth that I had bought. And I plopped down on the drums and I did sound check. And then I took everything to the dressing room and was like, I should probably figure out food. Like it was insane, but it was so worth it. And I was in such a good mood. And I didn't know that the Toledo Zoo had not only cool zoo animals, but an aquarium with a sea turtle. So I got bonus sea turtle time, which was like the best. I was so happy. It was so worth it. But yeah, it was a journey. And there have been times, that was one of them, when I was on A Night with Janis Joplin, we had our first dress rehearsal. And we were in Providence, Rhode Island. And so I took an Uber to Roger Williams Park Zoo. And when I was trying to leave, the Uber could not find the zoo. And I was losing my mind.
Oh my gosh.
I was the music director of that tour. I needed to be on time. I was, trying to be a leader and with new people. And I was losing my mind. And finally the Uber found me. But like I had started talking to people and being like, hey, is there any way that I could get like a ride to like just out of this park or something? And then like when people were not being cooperative, I just jogged and started running out of the park. And I met the Uber like halfway and I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, we're good. But yeah, I have definitely never been late because of a zoo, but I have had some challenging times because of a zoo.
Little close for comfort.
And always worth it.
And always worth it. Oh, that's awesome. So how many total have you been to?
138 zoos, aquariums, rescues, and rehab facilities.
That's amazing. Were they all in the US?
Yes. Yeah, when I was I'm trying to think back when I was in Europe and stuff, I hadn't really started the quest yet. So yeah.
Awesome. So
well, no, that's a lie. Canada. I knew I was lying. Canada. I've been to the Toronto Zoo and a couple up in like Niagara Falls, but mostly maybe 135 in the US and then 3 in Canada so far.
That's incredible. That's like a crazy number, which that's awesome. That's awesome. So at this point, so you have been to so many of these places. So when did your deeper connection with the zoos start to evolve when you start to actually meet people and everything?
Well, like I said, I always felt this deep connection to the animals. And then during that second tour that I did, when I was the 11-month tour, when I really ramped it up and was like hitting any zoo that I could find, I also went through a divorce and some other major changes in my life, and moved down to Philadelphia area, which was, a lot of change. Going through that on a tour was a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, how did you survive that?" I actually think it helped. I was drumming every night. I was not there. I was, there. It worked out pretty well for how I work. And but when I moved to Philly, I didn't really have many people or places or things, and so I became a member at the Philadelphia Zoo. And that is where I fell madly in love with Mei Lin, who is up here, all and she was there at the time, I think 15, and then 16-year-old red panda. And I had never felt such an intense connection to any animal other than some sea turtles. And it was my quest to find out more about her and the other pandas there and to learn about red pandas, that led me to start talking to keepers. And then once I started doing that, it was like the dams burst open. And it started off just wanting to know about animals. I did not want to know keeper names. I mean, I didn't care. It was my gateway to the animals. They were just signs that could talk instead of being read, and that had, deeper information. But as I started talking, it started off as, "Oh, who's this panda? Oh, this is Mei Lin. Oh, cool. What's she like? Oh my God, I love her. Oh my God, she does this. Oh my God." And then once that passion was there, then I'm like, "Oh, now I'm noticing you." Okay, And I remember there was a giant panda keeper in Memphis that I talked to for probably half an hour. And there's just a couple other keepers that, as I started finding out about their animals, I was like, "Oh, these people are cool." And it made me want to talk to more. And the more I talked to, the cooler they were. And the cycle goes on and on. And yeah, there are a lot of really cool people in this field.
I 100% agree with that statement. So I think the next natural question would be then, let's talk about your podcast. Let's talk about Rossifari. Where did that come from? So, like, tell me, like, I'm just going to assume that no one listening to this has any idea. So let's take it back to square one. So, what is your podcast? How did it come to be? And what made you decide to do that particular topic?
Sure. So, okay. So, the Rossifari Podcast is a zoo positive, conservation focused podcast. That's my elevator pitch. And the not that is that I like talking to people about animals and conservation and zoos and stuff. And it literally started where one day I was just like, as I mentioned, I liked talking to keepers. And one day I was like, I should find the podcast where they interview zookeepers all the time and tell the stories behind the scenes at the zoo and stuff. And I found some where the podcasts are keepers talking about just animals. And I found some where it's one zoo specific. Usually about specific topics, not actually about the keepers. But I never found anything that was like what I was doing at zoos, where I was talking to people and finding out about them and connecting to their animals through them. And I don't know if you've heard of this thing. There's this little thing called COVID. It's happening right now. And so since I suddenly found myself with some time and with this idea had already been in my head, my original plan was that as I went on tour, as I went to the zoos, I would connect with the zoos beforehand and like interview their keepers while I was there. Instead, what it has become for the most part is I do Zoom interviews with people I wish I was hanging
Yes.
out with. Although I have had some zoos that welcome me, and I do have some COVID stuff in place where I disinfect my mic. So I have gotten to go to some zoos and travel for this, and those are always very special moments. Um, but yeah, and the idea is to connect my people to animals through their people, as I like to say. And the initial idea was just I thought I would like interview a zookeeper every week or whatever. But then the more I learned about how interconnected keeping and conservation is, and the more that my heart grew for conservation as I learned about it as a kind of outsider, the more I also started including conservation organizations. And so, now there are plenty of episodes from plenty of zoos all around the country, but also we've got Okapi Conservation Project and Red Panda Network and Penguins International and all of that stuff. So that's the idea of what the podcast is. and kind of where it came from. But then the other part of this is that when I started going to these zoos, I started taking animal pictures. And for a long time, it was just on my iPhone. It was just for me. It was what it was. But I started noticing that I was getting some really quality shots, even just on the phone. And there would be times that like 5 or 6 of us would go to the zoo because I wasn't always alone. Sometimes people would want to come. And there'd be 5 or 6 of us with our phones up at an exhibit taking a picture of an animal. And 4 of the pictures would be blurry or them looking the other way, and one of them would be a beautiful head-on shot, perfectly zoomed, and I got that shot. And I don't understand why. I don't have a background in photography. I feel like a lot of it has to do with me studying and learning about and understanding animals, but I was getting cool shots, especially just on an iPhone. And then eventually, my girlfriend got me a nice camera, but it's not even like a DSLR. It's not professional level or anything. It's just a good camera with a good zoom. And I kept getting cool shots. And so I launched the Rossifari Instagram mainly as a way to share my animal photos with friends. Whenever I would get a cool shot, I would show a couple friends. They would freak out. They would share it with their friends. And I was like, oh, I should have an Instagram. That would be fun.
That's the perfect medium.
Yeah. But I had no idea that it would become anything. Like when I launched it, Rossifari, obviously a pun. My last name is Rossi, and it's my zoo safari. So I made a portmanteau, and it made me happy, and that I like dumb jokes and puns. I like words. And it was for a way for my friends to see my photos, and then other people started finding it, and then more people, and then I followed animal photographers and zoos, and they followed me back, and now we're over 5,000 followers, and that was kind of the platform that let me know if I launched the podcast that I'd be in good hands, because I started talking to people on there. And I reached out to, when I first thought of this, I reached out to a bunch of keepers that had started following me and commented on my pictures. And sometimes like keepers love to identify their own animals by name and pictures and stuff. And so I reached out to some of them and I was like, hey, would you be on my podcast if I made a podcast? And this is what I'm thinking of doing. And what do you think? And they were all super into it and super supportive. So I launched it.
It's a great story. Like, and just talk about just an organic one that all the pieces happen to fall into place. Like all the dominoes fell in the right order for you to launch this. And so what has it been like for you? Because I'm just putting myself in like your shoes. Like, let's say that I did the exact opposite where I just happened to really, really love theater. And so I started a podcast on theater. What has it been like for you to like enter a field that you were not previously in? Like, have you ran into any issues or anything? How has that been for navigating that for you?
I haven't really run into any issues. People have been cool, and since I did come up in that world, even as a fan, I was pretty lucky. Also, my girlfriend is a 4th-year vet student trying to become a zoo vet, so I do have some good guidance, in that world. But the only issues that I've had is every once in a while I will ask a pretty dumb question or phrase something poorly. In my interview with Lucas Mears from Okapi Conservation Project, he was talking about the women's roles in the culture there and how to work with that. And I think I said twice, I was like, yeah, it's cool that you're in there changing the culture. And that's a big no-no. You don't change culture as a conservation organization. You show them things and you work within their culture, and you oftentimes have many guides in the culture who can make sure you're not changing the culture. So I used the word change. It was wrong, but that's okay, because since I'm an outsider, he just very nicely corrected me. And there are a lot of people who listen to this who are not in the conservation world either, who all just learned because I learned that that fact. And I really love being able to bring the outsider, because I don't think we ever get too inside baseball on the podcast, because someone starts spouting off, AZA, AZK, blah blah, and I'm like, whoa, what letters did you just? I don't know, I didn't know what an SSP was at the time, when we started this. So if you follow the podcast, and especially if you listen from the beginning, you learn as I learn, and that's a lot of fun. There are definitely
That's
episodes
awesome.
where somebody tells me about a conservation project that I didn't know exists, and then a month later, that project is on my podcast, and now I'm an expert on it, and that's really cool, you know?
Yeah, that sounds so satisfying
It really
just to see
is.
the whole story.
Yeah, and the
Um,
other cool thing about it that I have learned is that, so I've gotten to meet a ton of cool animals. So many. I think I'm up to having hung out with 28 red pandas in my life. They're my favorite species now. And on top of that, I mean, I've hung out with a tarantula, and I used to be an arachnophobe, and there's a whole episode about me overcoming that and actually handling a tarantula. And walruses, that was insane. And so many different primates and, little New World monkeys, and all the way up to playing through glass, but playing with a chimp and learning some of its sign language and having it teach me how to play with it. Um, the experiences that I have had are insane. And I was talking to my buddy Colleen, who's a zookeeper who's been on a couple times and is just very encouraging and a very helpful person with the podcast. And she told me, she's been a keeper for years and she has not had the experiences that I've had.
wow.
I mean, the animals she's with every day, and she gets to have like deeper experiences with them. And I'm super jealous of that fact. But, whereas I'm jealous of her getting to wear Lucille the binturong on her shoulder, I've also had binturongs on my shoulders, but I've also held a baby red panda, which she is not allowed to do. She is occasionally allowed to see them, but not actually like hold one. And I have not only held like a little one in my hand, but have also had a couple other ones crawling on me. And, the walrus thing, there are only a few facilities in the country that have walruses. Most keepers will never get to interact with one. And I have played with and petted and stood right with a walrus. That was insane, and sea
Yeah.
lions and seals. And one day, it wasn't even part of the interview, but just we did lunch with the dolphins, and the dolphins were swimming over and playing with us, and like I was in this dolphin arena completely alone except for the keepers that I was with, and I was like, what is this life? It's insane. And feeding otters, I could go on all day, but I've had all
Yeah.
these experiences in 7 months of doing this that just don't even make sense to me. And I have so many more offers on the table once COVID calms down, because every facility is different. But the things that I know that are coming down the pike, once that is a little more cleared up, it's even more insane. The amount of time with
Oh,
animals and cool people and stuff that are coming is just amazing.
that's that's exciting.
It's so cool.
Like that's exciting. That is so exciting, especially from the relative, like you said, in a 7 month time window. That wasn't long at all to have that many number of experiences. That is awesome. I'm just curious, since you have talked to so many zookeepers and like just conservationists, have you found like a certain theme across, your interviews with them, or like any like connecting the dots? Just being an outsider and connecting and like talking with so many different people. Are you finding a commonality between a lot of your interviews?
This will not shock you at all, but the number one thing is that whether they are the most people person ever or the least people person ever, and you might wonder, why would somebody who's not a people person do a podcast? Well, I don't know. But if you start talking about the animals that they love, they open up completely. It's amazing. Anytime that I'm trying, because I like to start my interviews talking about the person, and it usually goes very well. But every once in a while, it's, so who are you? I'm Bob. What do you do? I'm a zookeeper. Why? I like keeping animals at the zoo. And at that point, I just completely abandon it and I go, cool. So tell me about your favorite animal. And suddenly they're off on a 20-minute rant. And I'm learning all about Bob's favorite bird and the fact that it eats this kind of food and poops this kind of way and has a keeper that it doesn't like. And, where its chicks have gone off into breeding programs, and how it's an ambassador for its species, and how there's a conservation organization helping them. And then once that's happened, then I'm like, so Bob, tell me more about why you got into this. And now that the door, the door is open, then it's Boom. So my trick is to always, I keep that in, it's the arrow in my quiver that I wait on using until I either need to or until I just get to the point where it's time to talk animals. Um, but yeah, if you talk to anyone, and one thing that's interesting is that a lot of zookeepers are young female, and many are attractive. And I am a guy who's hopping in their DMs to try to convince them to do a podcast because that's what we do here. And Instagram is a truly great way to connect with people all throughout the conservation community. And so I have also learned there that if I hop in and I'm like, oh my God, this is the cutest tree kangaroo I've ever seen, then no one ever seems too concerned. But if I hop in and I'm like, hi, my name's John, I'd love to chat with you, then you hit a little resistance. And it's really funny to me to see how much animals as the common ground really makes everything okay, you know? Um, Beyond that, I would just say that pretty much everyone that I've talked to is insanely driven, very, very in love with what they do, willing to sacrifice, personal life things and definitely financially to do what they love. And almost everyone is a big fan of the industry as a whole and of other keepers. One of the things that shocked me, I figured I would have the hardest time getting keepers to listen to my podcast, because if this is what you do for 40 or more hours a week, the last thing you want to do is go listen to someone else talk about your job. Instead, I would say more than half of my audience are zookeepers, and some of the most rabid fans
Wow.
are keepers. And they reach out to me and they reach out to each other. There's this whole little community that's formed up of guests that have reached out to each other and other keepers that have reached out to my guests and become friends just through the podcast. And I would have never predicted that, Why would you want to spend an extra 2 hours a week um, doing, learning about your job, basically? Like, that's weird to me. But they tend to love it. And keepers, so many times now I reach out to people and I'm like, hey, I love your content. I'd be interested in having you on the podcast. And they're like, oh yeah, love the podcast. This was my favorite episode. This idea, oh, and I know this person who was a guest and this person who was a guest. And yeah, let's when can we do this? And I'm like, oh, cool.
That's great. It is, and I know that when we chatted the first time, just how interconnected it all is, and how so supportive this field is, because it's all ran on passion. And if your passion isn't there, then you're just not going to thrive. But when it is there, and you all have that common ground, it doesn't matter your gender, your age, your color of your skin. It doesn't matter when you all are there because you want to save wildlife in whatever form that is, and you already know that you have that thing that connects you. It's so powerful. Like, even when the person that might just only speak 5 words, but you connect immediately because you both love the same thing. And so then just, I mean, that's gorgeous that you're able to just make people open up like that. Because having been in the zoo world for years, I saw that as well. There's this super, extroverted people that, love to doing the zookeeper chats. And then there's the other people that are like, I'm only doing this talk because my boss is making me.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but everybody together, though, you're all work together and you find a way to work together because you just want the best experience possible for the guests, because that's how conservation happens. And then also because you want your animals to have the best life possible as well.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I really love, one role that I serve in this community that I didn't realize until someone pointed it out to me, is that I am living proof that you, by talking to your guests and by reaching out to people and sharing your animal stories and sharing your passion, can have a actual, able to be seen and heard impact on somebody. Because I have gone from a zoo fan to a conservation educator, and the with the podcast we've I constantly hear stories of people that learn about zoos or conservation organizations and raise money for them or donate money to them because they heard them on the podcast. I know, Rossifari has raised over $1,000 for Red Panda Network alone.
That's
And
amazing.
and there are plenty of others. And like, I remember I did an episode on Elmwood Park Zoo, and then when they had a flood there, and it wasn't even an episode about Elmwood Park Zoo, but in the intro to another episode, I mentioned I had gone and I helped them clean up the flood and everything and how amazing they were. And I know 3 people that reached out to me and were like, hey, just made a donation to Elmwood Park because of, what you said. And that blows my mind. And I've been able to help in small little ways like that with different zoos. Just upping their follower count, or sharing about fundraising, or finding out that a conservation organization is having a speaker and they're worried that they're not going to have good questions. So can I come in as a ringer and ask some questions? And I love it. I love doing it. I love being a part of it. And I'm only here because of the direct connection that keepers made with me and inspired me and taught me and took the time to educate me. And when all of this started, I didn't know what an AZA was. I didn't know what the SSP was. I knew that conservation was a thing, and I knew about WWF and stuff, but like I said, I didn't know what a red panda was. And now they're literally my favorite animal, and I have pictures of them behind me and a stuffed one sitting over there. And I am a volunteer on the communications and writing team of the Red Panda Network. And like, so much has come of just people taking the time to be cool and talk to me about stuff well before the podcast.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel, story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.